Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Teresa. This is Lost My Thread. Today is part 2 of me sharing the experience of refashioning my me-made wedding dress. I made a video a couple of months ago sharing my plans to refashion my me-made wedding dress that I made 20 years ago. The idea is I wanted to make something to wear to go out for dinner with my husband for our 20th wedding anniversary. That's going to be the end of November, so I do have a hard deadline on that and it is approaching. In the first video, I really just wanted to tell you a bit more about the dress, about the fabric, give you a general idea of the kinds of things I was looking for, and I was really looking for suggestions from all of you. You did not disappoint. I got some fantastic suggestions. So today I want to talk about some of the suggestions that I got. I also want to talk about what it was like to unpick the fabric and take this dress apart. It was surprisingly emotional for me. And I will also be sharing the plans of what I'm going to make, including a few muslins to try and get the fit just right. I have to say a huge thank you to anybody who gave me suggestions. When you look for help in the sewing community, the community answers, guys. I was honestly floored by all the fantastic suggestions. I wish I could share them all now and you could all see all the great pattern suggestions. If you are curious to see what people suggested and want to see some interesting, unique, and probably new to you patterns, there are a lot that were new to me, I really do encourage you guys to go and check out the comments on that video. I'm going to mention a few of the ones that stood out to me. So the Shelby dress by True Bias was one that was a very popular suggestion, and it was one that I hadn't thought of, but actually I think was a really good idea for this dress. What I like about this one is that it's definitely a more casual end of things, but I feel like it could be that more dressy just with the more dressy fabric. It's definitely very 90s vibes. I am sure I wore very similar dresses in the 90s. It's one that I have thought about from time to time, so that was definitely a top contender for me. A few people also suggested the Laura dress by True Bias. I think this was probably the most recommended pattern, but I have to say that style and that shape, I feel like I would find really difficult to fit me in a way that I would be happy with over the bust. And frankly, I don't love it enough to go through all that effort. I do really love it on other people. I just feel like it's one of those things that's more for other people than it is for myself. Another really good suggestion that just didn't feel right for me for this project was the Upton dress by Cashmerette. The Upton dress is a fit and flare dress, and I feel like in general it's actually a pretty similar style to my original wedding dress, and I kind of wanted to go away from that and do something a little bit different. I feel like if I used that fabric with the Upton dress, it would be very dressy, very evening gowny, and just wouldn't be as wearable in the day-to-day. I also had suggestions for the Magnolia dress by Deer and Doe, and I have to say this one, I wish I could have made this one. It is such a beautiful dress, and it is one that I at some point feel like I'm gonna have to make because it is just so beautiful and so elegant, especially the maxi length. But I knew that I wouldn't have enough fabric to be able to make that, so it really wasn't an option for me for this project. But man, it would have been stunning. Although it would have probably gone more into the too dressy thing, and maybe I would have let it and been okay with it. But unfortunately, fabric restrictions, it was not gonna happen. And very much the same kind of story with the Wildwood wrap dress by Sew House 7. This is another one, I just keep seeing it, I keep thinking about it. It's got a really unique, really beautiful collar section, the way it wraps over. I feel like it is just so beautiful and definitely really in that nice, a bit professional, but also a bit just cool and casual. Would have loved to make this, but definitely wouldn't have had enough fabric from the scraps that I had from the dress. There were a few people who mentioned how nice that neckline was on the original dress, what a beautiful shape and how much it suited me. And honestly, guys, I totally agree with you. I think it is a gorgeous neckline and I really wish I could have somehow kept it. What I will say is I traced it out because I'm not gonna let that neckline die with that dress. It's just a really great width, the depth, shape for my body. So I traced it out and my plan is to use that at some point on a future dress. I think probably the Cashmere Upton dress. I feel like it would suit that really well and just be a slightly different neckline. But I couldn't have used the original bodice. It was just too tight, too small, too ill-fitted. And I kind of wanted to go with a different style, to be completely honest. I also had a few people suggesting to make a jumpsuit or a faux jumpsuit, which I really like the idea of. I very much enjoy wearing a jumpsuit these days, and it's not something that I ever would have made or worn back when I was originally making my wedding dress when I was 21. And it seemed like a nice merging of the two, like my past self with the dress turning into something for more my present day self. I liked the idea, and the one that I decided that I wanted to go for was the Joe jumpsuit by Cosy Colors. This one has a really unusual construction. It's definitely a more intermediate pattern. There are all these binding pieces that go in between the bodice and on the sleeve to give that shape. There's a really just pronounced sleeve, quite a good statement sleeve. They're calling a croissant sleeve, which I think is definitely something that I want to make at some point. But I had to actually pivot on that idea and not go with the jumpsuit once I took this dress apart. So I have to say, taking this dress apart was emotional. I was really expecting when I got this dress out of the box and looked at it and tried it on that I was going to be kind of overcome with emotion and remembering the time when I got married. And it didn't really happen, to be honest. Like, I did feel like, oh yeah, look, that's, that's nice, and I remember this, and it felt sweet and nice. My husband buttoning those buttons up for me to try it on to show you guys that dress. But I didn't feel super emotional. But I really just swung into the full-on emotion and nostalgia when I started unpicking this dress. I will say I did set myself up for it to some degree. When I was spending the time to unpick the dress, I wanted it to be a nice experience, and I wanted to spend some time thinking about the time when I was making this dress. So I set myself up with some aromatherapy oils. I was having some nice herbal tea. I was listening to nostalgic music with my headphones. So I'm calling nostalgic music, but basically the stuff that I was listening to loads at the time when I was making this dress. So Bjork Vespertine, that is definitely one of my top Bjork albums, one of my top albums of all time. Listened to that loads. I was listening to the Smoking Popes. I was listening to Black Star. I basically decided I'm gonna just get myself immersed into where I was in 2003 when I was making this dress. And so I sat down in a nice quiet space in my living room and sat unpicking and thought a little bit about what it was like when I was making this dress. And man, did it really take me back. I think seeing my actual stitches really did make me feel in tune with my previous self. So when I came to the UK in September of 2003, I came on a fiancé visa, knowing that I was going to get married in November. I basically had 2 months to sew my wedding dress, and it was a really strange time in my life. I think, most of us in our lives, we have periods where things are just generally just quiet and chill and we're going along, and then something happens, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Some big thing happens and it really just kind of shakes you up, and things are a bit weird for a while, and then gradually, for better or for worse, things just kind of settle down into the low normal day-to-day. This was definitely a very big shakeup in my life. I had met the man of my dreams, the person that I knew I wanted to be with, but he lived in another country, so I spent a year and a half sending messages, emails, letters, visiting my husband back and forth. And when I came here, it was just the most wonderful and exciting thing that I could dream of. I was finally going to be with this person that I knew that I was meant to be with. It was so exciting. It was so wonderful and happy. But it was also me moving to a completely different country where I only knew one person, and I didn't really even know how things worked in that country. I mean, look, it's not hugely different, but it's different. I felt very much out of place. I had been living in an apartment with my cousin and my best friend, and I moved into my in-laws' house because when I first moved here, I wasn't able to get a job until after I was married. So I didn't have the income to rent a place with my husband. So initially we were living with his family. It was just all around a really strange time in my life, and I had a lot of time by myself because my husband was still working 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and I couldn't work. So during those hours, I was at home in my in-laws' house, and I was reading, and I was going for walks and listening to a lot of music. But something for me that was really grounding and really helped me was having this sewing project to work on. I had been sewing before I came to London, and being able to bring my machine with me and work on my wedding dress, I felt like it really gave me a point that felt like I'm the same Teresa. It helped me to feel like I hadn't lost myself, as it were. I mean, I didn't think I'd lost myself, but there was just a nice connection to my life before I came to London, because things did change just so dramatically, really genuinely in really good ways. But it was just a very different time in my life. And being in my in-laws' house, I definitely didn't always feel like I could just do what I wanted. I lost my independence. And sewing was a way for me to kind of get inside myself, tuck into myself. And it always has felt very just like a thing I do for me. And so being able to make my dress and have something to focus on my days when I was by myself, it was really, really useful and really therapeutic for me. And pulling apart those seams, it really did just take me back to that point of that really strange just transition in my life where there was just so much going on, and the grounding nature of this sewing project. It's kind of weird because I think most people, when they're sewing a wedding dress, especially their own wedding dress, probably feel stressed about sewing the dress. Like that's one of the big stressors for people. But of all the weird, strange, stressful things going on in my life, getting to work on my dress and sewing was actually calming and relaxing and grounding. And I think it was just because of that weird upheaval that was going on in the background. So it was definitely a nostalgic experience taking apart this dress. It was also just so fascinating to look at what my sewing was like 20 years ago. I had been sewing for, I guess, like 5 years. I learned to sew when I was 16 in high school, but I wouldn't say that I was sewing consistently or that frequently in that period. It was just a little bit on and off here and there. And so when I was working on the wedding dress, I definitely didn't know as much as I know now. No surprises there. And I made some interesting choices. I have mentioned this before, but when I started sewing, I don't know why, but I used to sew with a really short stitch length. It might be that I was told that or taught that from my sewing teacher. Couldn't tell you. It could also be that I just didn't really adjust my stitch length regardless of what I was sewing, which I think is probably likely to be a factor. And I think in my mind, I have this memory of thinking tighter stitches will be stronger, they'll hold things together more. But man, does it make it more awkward when you're unpicking. And also often seams don't sit as flatly. So I do a range of stitch lengths depending on what I'm making. I do a little test and I see what looks the flattest and the neatest, and that's what I go with. At the time, I feel like I was probably stitching at like a 2 or maybe even a 1.8 for these seams. And for this dress, I don't remember seeing this on anything else that I've made. I did 2 rows of stitches. So I did another row of stitching in the seam allowance. I think to make it more secure and strong. I didn't have an overlocker or a serger, so I did used to just pink a lot of my seams, pinking shears, to make it less likely to fray. Couldn't tell you why I did the 2 rows of stitches, but it did make things a lot more awkward when I was unpicking. You guys may have seen, I've got a brace on my wrist right now because of an ulnar nerve tension that I've got going on, a problem with my wrist and my hand. And if I'm not holding my hand straight, if I'm doing too much like bending or stretching, I'm getting pain. And so when I was unpicking, I definitely had to try and keep my hand as straight as possible, my wrist as straight as possible. And I was having to take breaks here or there. It was fine. I wasn't going to be doing anything that was going to cause me any problems, but I'm just saying that it didn't help me. The fact that I had this extra row of stitches and everything was super tight. It was definitely a more awkward one to unpick. The hem though on this dress, the long train hem was actually hand stitched, so it was a lot easier to pull those stitches out. Now I have to say, I am very impressed with my past self for hand stitching that whole hem, and I actually hand stitched it twice. I did a really good blind hem. You really cannot see it at all on the outside. And I actually hand stitched it all twice. So I folded up the bottom of the dress and I stitched it, hand stitched it in place. And then I folded it up again to attach it to the lining. Seriously guys, I was so impressed with myself. It was really beautiful and I was really impressed with how neat it was and how lovely it looked from the outside as well as from the inside. But I was also very happy that it pulled out much more easily because the stitches were not as tight as the ones that I had on the rest of the dress. It also really made me laugh to see all the markings that I had made on this dress, because I used to always use tracing wheel and tracing paper to put any markings on my fabrics, because that is what my sewing teacher taught me to do, and I didn't know that there was another way to do things. Remember, this is 2003. There was not a lot of just places to get information about sewing, so I was relying strictly on what I had been told. I did also have some chalk pencils, but I felt like they just didn't work that great, so I really tended to use the tracing paper and tracing wheel. But often those leave marks that don't come off very easily, especially if you iron over them, which is something I only learned within the last 5 years or so, that is what often makes them more permanent. But I used to just put those markings all over the inside of my garment because I felt like it's the inside. Like, no one's gonna see the inside. As long as it's on the wrong side of the fabric, whatever markings I want to put on there. So a lot of the things that I made in the past have like numbers written on them. So this one, fair enough, it was fully lined. So all of these things were on the inside. Like no one, literally no one, myself even, was going to see those unless I completely unpicked the dress like I did. But I was marking like the number of the pattern pieces, which I totally remember doing. I also marked where the buttons were supposed to go, and that actually was on the right side of the fabric, but the button was covering it up. So I was like, it doesn't make a difference. But man, I would not do that now. But it's just funny to remember, like, you don't know what you don't know. And I felt like that's just the way you're supposed to mark it. And if you have something that appears on the outside, you just better make sure that you cover it up. So when I unpicked this, I saw that the bodice had interfacing, iron-on interfacing across the whole of the bodice, which was, I think, a nice way with a more drapey fabric to make sure that there was a good amount of structure within the bodice. And I think that worked really well for the wedding dress, and I'm glad that it was there. But it did just mean that those pieces were kind of just not available to me. They were pretty small pieces, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to use them because I hadn't pre-washed the fabric, and I did want to be able to wash whatever I was making now. If I put that in the washing machine with the iron-on interfacing with it not pre-shrunk, I didn't think it was going to come out very well. It was also really inexpensive interfacing. At the time, I didn't know about woven interfacing. I used the very cheap stuff that just kind of tears apart. So I didn't particularly want to use those bodice pieces, but it just made it a little more limiting what I could use. The other thing that really just made me take a step back from my previous plans was looking at the skirt pieces. So I knew there was a seam going down the back of the skirt, so what would go down the train, the center of the train, to divide that up in two. But somehow I didn't register that the skirt is actually all pieces. So it's a 7 gourd skirt. So there's a front panel and then 6 other panels, so 3 each side going around to the back, which means that all of those pieces are very narrow at the top and then they fan out to get wider as the skirt goes down. It's a beautiful way to get shape, and I actually really do love a gourd skirt and the movement that you can get and the fullness that you can get with that. But what that meant is that the pieces that I was working with were necessarily going to be very small at the top, so it was really going to limit what I was going to be able to cut out of them. So this is where my plans had to change. I tried laying out the pieces of the Joe jumpsuit on my dress, but because those pieces were so narrow at the top, I could not get trouser legs onto them, so there was no way I was going to be able to get any kind of jumpsuit out of it. And so I really had to reconsider what I could do given the restrictions of the fabric. And I thought about a dress that hadn't occurred to me, wasn't suggested, but realized actually was maybe the perfect solution, which is the Anna dress from By Hand London. The thing that is really useful and good about this dress, given what I had to work with, is that it is a 7 gourd skirt. So it is essentially the same shape of the skirt without the train at the end, but basically it's 7 pieces that are narrow at the top and then they're fuller out as it goes down to the bottom. I will say the wedding dress that I was working with was too small for me, so I knew that if I was going to make a dress where the skirt was going to fit me, I wouldn't be able to use the full length of those pieces, but I could certainly use some of it. I could lose the top section and then use the bottom to create the skirt section. And so I decided, let's see if that works. I had already taken the dress apart and I decided I was going to also unpick the lining. I didn't unpick the lining, guys. I cut along the seam for the lining pieces because life's too short. I wasn't going to keep that lining or use that lining. but I really just wanted to get a kind of idea of knowing, are these pieces going to fit on there? Can I get the bodice out of essentially that train section? And can I get a long enough dress that I'm happy with out of the section of skirt that I would have available to me? So I cut the first muslin out of that lining fabric, which was proof of concept. I knew that I could get that dress out of the scraps of the dress that I had. I decided to make it the shorter length version because there are two length versions, though I could have theoretically made it a little bit longer. I just thought, let's start with that and see what it's like. This has an optional thigh slit as well, so I decided to keep the thigh slit in just to give me an idea of what that style would look like. Now, that is something that I wouldn't want to be wearing on the day-to-day, but I felt like it's a nice detail to have for my anniversary night with that thigh slit, and then I can then close it up if I don't want to have it and I want to wear this dress otherwise. I had a bit of a hard time picking a size for this pattern because there are two size bands. The smaller size band has a B sewing cup size, which essentially means a 2-inch difference between the high and the full bust. And then there is a larger size band that has a D sewing bust cup size, which is a 4-inch difference between the high and the full bust. I have a 4-inch difference between my high and my full bust. However, the larger size band, the smallest size of that band, I'm still theoretically 2 sizes smaller than that. And so I didn't think that was going to fit me very well. So I decided I was going to go with the smaller one, but I would do a full bust adjustment. So there is actually a tutorial of how to do a full bust adjustment on the By Hand London website. So I thought I'm going to follow along and do that. Now, the shape of this dress, it's a really beautiful shape. I like the drop sleeve on the bodice. There are pleats that come up the front that sit just under the bust, 2 pleats, or 2 on each side, and there are also darts on the back to give really nice shaping. So the idea is that the pleats really sit kind of just under the bust, but the full bust adjustment was going to add a dart coming from the side seam, and that felt like kind of a lot, and I didn't particularly love the idea of having those pleats and the dart, but that was their tutorial for a full bust adjustment, and I felt like if that's what you gotta do, Teresa, that's what you gotta do. So I decided to make the size that went with my measurements with the full bust adjustment to see how it went, and this is my first muslin. So this, hilariously to me, is tighter than my wedding dress. It is really not fitting. Clearly have a lot of excess in the upper back, so we need to shorten that for sure. I did the full bust adjustment, so I do have this bust dart, and probably the bust is like, maybe it fits the back. It feels okay in the high bust, to be fair. But I'm like a sausage in this thing. This is not good. I do think these darts as well are too high. The bottom of my bra is here, so it's kind of just like putting my breast on a shelf, which I don't think is particularly nice. I do really love this high slit. I think this is something I would like to try if I can make it a bit longer. I will say I didn't even hem it, but looking at this, it's supposed to be midi length, and I didn't shorten it. I kept it to the midi length, but it is only just to my knee. I can see potential though. I like the shape, I like the sleeve, I like the neckline. I like, in theory, the way this fits on the bust, but definitely this has got a long way to go. I'm gonna turn around so you can see how stretched this invisible zipper is, and partly for myself for reference. But yes, attempt 1 needs some work. After that, I did go back and recheck the sizes, and I remeasured my body because I hadn't measured. I went with my just like standard measurements of what my body usually is. And I think being a little bit less active, but also, you know, gearing up for winter, my waist is actually 1 inch bigger than I thought it was, or what it typically would be. So I think that is a factor in it being too small, but it was definitely pretty off on the whole as far as the fit. So I decided for my second version, I'm just going to go for the smallest size of the larger size band, which means it will be the right size sort of proportions for the bust, even though it's probably going to be a bit too big. And we'll see what that looks like. That was muslin number 2. So it is definitely too big, this one, but I feel like maybe it's a little closer. I feel like these are sitting in a better place. This is where the bottom of my bra is. The neckline's definitely too wide, so I'm going to need to take, I think, the whole thing probably. I brought that in. No, that's going to shift that too far over. Okay, fine. Well, I can bring the top in. I think that would be better. The sides, it's definitely quite loose here. I feel like there's something going on where I really don't think I cut out the wrong size, but this seems more than 2 sizes bigger to me. But the side definitely needs to go in. Probably about, I'm going to stick some pins in. I feel like seeing it in that way, maybe it's a little bit bulky up here, but I think with a drop sleeve, there's always some element of that, and I don't think that bothers me too much. So if I can remove a wedge up here by doing a narrow shoulder adjustment, and also narrow shoulder at the back, sway back to bring that section up, I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's too loose in the back. You want some room to be able to stretch, so I feel like those things will probably make it pretty good. So on to the next one. Okay, muslin number 3, where I did the thing that you are never supposed to do, and I made 4 different changes at once. Everyone says make one change and see how it goes, but I winged it and I love it. All right, so what I did, the differences I made, I didn't want to shift these over, but I knew that I needed to remove generally some fabric from this central area. So what I did was I made a line going down approximately here, and I removed a wedge, and I based that on what I was able to pinch out. I did some of it there because I knew also I needed to take some out of the side seam. So I guess that's what I did. I saw what I could pinch out of the side seam, which was 5/8 from the front and the back, which is 1 1/4 inch in total, which I removed from here. And then from the neckline, I also removed 5/8 of an inch by essentially pulling this in and then sort of evening that out to there. And to me, I think that is sitting really beautifully. So there was a wedge here and then just a straight line here. I did a similar straight line on the back because in general that was really tight as well. And then I did a little wedge at the top, similar to the front, just to remove a little bit more at the very top of the bodice. 5/8 of an inch there and 5/8 of an inch going down. And then I'm saying 5/8, but it was actually 5/8 overlapping, so 1 1/4. I hope that makes sense. And then I also removed some height, which turned out to be about 1 inch in total. So I did 1/2 inch overlapping essentially, and I think that is sitting really nice and straight now. And yeah, just in general, I'm super pleased, and I feel like this is fitted but still comfortable. I like how it's fitting across the bust. I don't have any bust darts, which is the plus of not doing the full bust adjustment, but just using the D cup size and then sizing it down to me. And just honestly, in general, I feel like it's pretty beautiful. I'm just looking at where it's sitting on the shoulders. Yeah, I mean, I did a little forward shoulder adjustment. Possibly I could do a teeny bit more. I might just do a tiny bit more of a forward shoulder adjustment, but that is a minor thing. I think overall that is looking pretty great, and I feel like that's my muslin. And let me tell you guys, I was really very happy about the look of that muslin. I did still take the tiniest smidge out of the front of the bodice and out of the back bodice and did a slight forward shoulder adjustment, just 1/2 inch. I realized I hadn't actually done it on this version. I'd only done that on muslin number 1, so I typically do that for my patterns. And I did then also, because I was altering the bodice, I had to change the facing pieces to match, and I also had to adjust the skirt pieces because I was removing sections from the bodice. There are a lot of seams that line up with the pleats and with the darts, and so I had to adjust the skirt panels as well. I think it's going to be so worth it in the end. I feel like I can really visualize how this is going to come together, and I cannot wait. I am so excited to get this dress sewn up, and I feel like it has turned out to be, I think, the perfect choice for my wedding dress refashion. Refashioning this dress has definitely been a journey, and a more emotional one than I was expecting. It was really nice to connect to my past self, and I think that is just another extra wonderful thing about this craft that we have. If you've been sewing for a while, you probably have garments. You pick them up and it just takes you back. It reminds you about the time that you made it. It can transport you back to another time of your life, and it's pretty awesome. And it was really fun to be able to do that with my wedding dress. I am so excited to get this sewn up. I think the finished dress is going to be stunning. I'm hoping. I will be revealing the finished dress to you guys after my anniversary. I need to give myself time to sew this up. My anniversary is the 29th of November, so you'll get to see it after the fact, and I will talk to you guys about what it was like to wear this dress for my anniversary dinner with my husband. I would love to hear if you've had similar experiences though with just having that kind of connection with garments that you've made in the past. I feel like these are the ways that we can connect to ourselves, but also connect to each other through this hobby that we have. Please do give me a like if you enjoyed the video today. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel if you want to see the finished anniversary refashion, but also if you want to see other videos of mine. I will see you guys all very soon. Bye!